Alright guys, all quite the Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen's back in action at the Nürburgring this upcoming weekend, but that does not mean it's a dull week for Max in the Formula 1 domain. You guys might remember in Japan when he kicked a journalist out of a media session, and apparently the FIA are looking to crack down on this matter. They have sent a message to Red Bull to say that from all respects, they are not happy with this conduct. Is this going to be yet another push factor for Max Verstappen to leave the sport? Very much intro to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Big weekend of racing, although there's no Formula 1 this month. Just a quick update on Lance Stroll. We talked about his run yesterday in the GT3 series at the World Challenge Europe, and I mentioned his pace was actually respectable. Of course, people were criticising him because they finished like 48, but there was quite a few kind of caveats in play here. One of which was, yes, Lance got a 115-second penalty for track limits, but the way the penalties work, it was actually quite controversial yesterday. I saw quite a few tweets talking about it because the blue flag, so if you got a couple of blue flags in different sectors, if you were less than 0.7 seconds ahead of the guy behind you, then the blue flags are wave. If you didn't get out the way within 2 sectors, you would be getting penalties. Now that feels reasonable, but then you've got to consider you've got that massive back straight where 0.7 of a second is actually quite a big distance. So it's kind of understandable that we weren't really seeing too many drivers get out the way when maybe they should have done for blue flags. They were getting penalties, and then the penalties like keep stacking. So if like Lance drove later on, so that by the time he got a track limits penalty, all of a sudden that was like a huge number. And actually his fastest lap time, it didn't finish the day as the quickest lap time, but it was in the ballpark. So anyway, I still think Stroll could be a good GT3 driver. I know that many of us wouldn't mind if he moved on from Formula 1. I think he could do good things over there. Loads of weird updates today. This is one. So this is at the Madrid. I really hate calling it that, but it's the new Madrid track that they're building, and they say it's going to be done in time. This is some maniac here in a van. I mean, honestly, kind of a legend, to be honest. But I don't know, they're doing construction work or something. He's found his way onto the track and has decided just to send it and get some practice in for the F1 cars. And he's had a bit of an incident. He's understeered massively. I don't even know what corner this is. I'm not familiar enough yet with the track layout. But yeah, he stacks it basically, goes off the road. It's just pretty funny to think of his thought process. He was like, well, I'm on an F1 track. I might as well go for it. And he has a bit of a moment and, well, officially the first crash at the new circuit before Formula 1 has even got anywhere near getting there. So yeah, has a bit of a moment, realises he's cocked up somewhat, comes to an end, and then people, of course, took some fantastic pictures as well of the bloke getting out of the car. So that's your Madrid update for the day. We also have some other various circuit updates, such as at Hungary. They're resurfacing, they're doing the second phase of it. I think a lot of work has happened in that circuit over the last couple of years. Always excited to go back. I wonder how it will get on with these cars as well. So that's a big development they're doing there. There's changes with Monza. I think they're doing some reconstruction. Same in Australia. So lots of work happening around the world, especially in potentially India. So there's a rumor today that Indian sports minister literally said there will be an F1 race in India in 2027. This is 100% happening. The first race will be at the Buddha International Circuit as it was before. So he just said there's going to be a race there next year. But I don't know if this is actually happening. People just say things sometimes. And Karun Chandok, who I would trust on this matter, says, good to see the ambition, but there's no way they'll be ready for that in 2027. Would love to see the Indian Grand Prix back, but there are various issues with the track right now, the ownership, the financial model, the regulatory and taxation issues, whatever. He says it's at least a few years away from having that happen. But we do wonder how the full calendar is going to play out next year. We know that Portimao's making a brief return. We know that Spa is going into a cycle where it's not going to be on the calendar every year. So how is the full calendar going to get finalized next season? Are we going to go towards 25 races? Because right now I think technically that's the limit, but there's not an impossibility that could happen, I think. Will India be a part of it? Maybe at some point, but we know that everyone seems to want a Grand Prix at the moment. There's talk about Turkey, there's talk about South Africa at some point, there's talk about Bangkok. So many tracks are possible, but look, if we do have another track, whatever you think of the Indian Grand Prix, at least it's actually a circuit, right? It's not a street track. So I guess I would give it that in the circumstance. Now, speaking of another racetrack, which is a real track, as dangerous and controversial as it might be, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, not happening, of course, this month, but it might still happen. So the Bahrain Grand Prix, we're pretty sure, is cooked. It is cancelled. But the Saudis, they still want their Grand Prix to happen, and they are trying to find ways to make that work. There is a potential solution here. Now, this solution, I don't think will make many of the mechanics very happy, because we are talking about a potential quadruple header. I imagine never before seen. But this is a possibility right now to run 4 consecutive races to close out the season. So the current plan is Vegas on the 21st of November, Qatar on the 29th of November. Of course, Vegas Saturday night race, that's why it's 8 days rather than 7. The current date for Abu Dhabi is the 6th of December. But they would like to still run the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix later this season and put it where Abu Dhabi is currently going. So they'd only have to, they'd have to move one Grand Prix and then put Saudi there instead. I mean, what do you guys think about this? I'm not opposed necessarily to more racing, right? But it just feels like quite the solution, like to move the Grand Prix by a whole week at Abu Dhabi of all Grand Prix. I'm sure people have travel, they've got stuff booked for that, right? So this is going to be a big deal if they do it, but they really want the Grand Prix to go ahead in Jeddah, and look, a quadruple header to close out the season. There's certainly going to be a lot of content in there. So they're considering this possibility. I don't know how likely I would suggest this is, but I wouldn't say it's impossible, right? So thoughts on that in the comment section below. Another quick update, Pirelli seem to have got their act together and will indeed be bringing the softest possible compounds to the next 2 Grand Prix that they've confirmed. So for Miami and for Canada, we will have the C3, the C4 and the C5. The first couple of Grand Prix, for various reasons, the tyres are not getting stretched as hard as they were in previous seasons. The cars have less downforce for one, and you could argue, well, they'll be sliding a little bit more, that actually could do more damage to the tyres. But we know that the drivers aren't driving on the limit, even in qualifying. Certainly in the race, they're not on the limit as they could be. The tyres are getting eased in a much more stable way. And it means that if we want to have tyre degradation a factor, and if we want to even have a chance of a 2-stop, we have to look towards the softer compounds. That's what Pirelli are doing. I think they usually do this for Canada anyway, but certainly for Miami, it'll be interesting to see how that all goes and whether we see more of that going forward as well, the move towards the softer compounds. We know the FIA are looking to make some serious regulation changes in the near future. They're looking at a phase 1 and a phase 2. We do have some details as to what that might be. So on the 9th of April, we understand, according to Motorsport Italia, that the active aerodynamic idea was discussed. So we talked about this as a potential solution for the current problem, to say, look, in qualifying, let the drivers do what they like with the active aero. No zones for it. They decide if they have the balls to take this corner with the active aero open, they're free to do so. And I think for something like 130R, it actually makes a lot of sense to allow this, right? Because they were forced to close active aero to go back to cornering mode before 130R. The cars can probably take it flat anyway, but even if they can't, then you'd still be able to carry more speed if you just lifted through 130R with active aero still open than if you were forced to close it. And again, you're putting the decision then more back into the hands of the driver and allowing the driver to take the level of risk that they feel like their car is capable of. So that's, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm keen for this to happen. It was the same story when DRS first came in 2011. The drivers could use it where they liked. That was then turned off largely because of safety concerns. And I think this is a valid concern. If you allow the drivers to do whatever they want everywhere, you do open the door to crashes because somebody is not expecting to have as little downforce as they do. Word to Jack Doohan, Turn 1 Suzuka last year, right? When he tried to keep the DRS open into Turn 1, it didn't go especially well. But this is something that is apparently being discussed. Again, as I've even said a little while ago when we first talked about this, the concern the teams will have, because I think the teams and the drivers are likely going to be in favour of this, because this would reduce downforce but also drag by like 30%, 35%, which means the battery power goes a lot further. It reduces lots of the qualifying problems that we have had. So I can see the logic for it. Of course, in the race, that's probably a different conversation, but at least in qualifying, I think this is something worthy of consideration. But also the teams are constantly talking about, well, safety, safety, safety. Behrman crashed with Colapinto because of the engine discrepancy, whatever. So, on the one hand, can they really kind of cry wolf? Maybe is not the right way to put it. But if they're talking about safety to make changes on one hand, it's a little bit more difficult to make the argument on the other hand that says, well, these are good changes, but also inevitably you are compromising some level of safety to get to that point. But let's talk about Red Bull and Max Verstappen. So, as always, several interesting things happening. We have Ralf Schumacher putting an article together, or it was reported in an article that he said that with no Helmut Marko, Max is not particularly happy. He said, I think you've got to be honest and say that Red Bull isn't attractive right now. It's a long-term project again. First of all, there's the engine development where they've done well, but the team is chaotic. It goes in all directions. There's no clear communication. Helmut Marko is also missing as a figure to give some kind of guidance, which feels, to be honest, like a reasonable assessment. Of course, the way the article kind of describes it is that, well, Red Bull are kind of missing this figure, and that's hurting Verstappen's future. So I don't know if Jos Verstappen actually read the article, which I think, Ralf Schumacher makes a reasonable point, maybe, that, Marko would give some direction, some advice, even though he might not be critical to Max Verstappen's involvement. But Jos, who doesn't tweet often, but when he does, it's usually quite entertaining. He replies and says, Ralf talks a lot of BS. So, yeah, Jos is basically saying, look, Marko being gone has nothing to do with the current circumstance. In fact, I'm happy he's gone, would be the read between the lines implication there. But, we know what it's like with Ralf Schumacher. But Max, the general feeling is his departure from Red Bull is particularly likely. Both John Noble and Scott Mitchell-Marm at the race, who, of course, speak to people in the paddock, let's put it that way, get a feel of what's happening, and their feeling is that Max won't be in F1 next season. It does feel like a lot of the signs, certainly GP's departure as well, are pointing in that direction. But there are other reasons that might be pointing him in that direction as well. We know that even before these regulations came around, Max was a frustrated man with the FIA, with the state of Formula One, especially when he might drop an odd word in a press conference. All of a sudden he's getting fines, and he's getting points, potential points deductions and all of this that were talked about as a possibility for consistent offences. Max was saying something on the radio and was like, look, if you don't want me to talk like this, first of all, unlucky, tough luck. It is what it is. And also don't broadcast it, right? That's on you. So it was a lot of drama even over the last couple of seasons. Max getting a little bit tired with journalists, a little bit tired with the FIA, the way that they're acting, and, in many cases, understandably, when they tried to do the jewellery clampdown and Hamilton turns up to the next press conference with 4 watches and 11 rings or whatever he did and a ton of necklaces, that's also part of the same discussion. But this, of course, it's gone to a new level now because there's loads of other reasons why Max isn't happy as well in Formula One, Red Bull, the regulations, having fun elsewhere, family concerns, right? There's all these other things, not concerns, but you know what I mean, spending more time with family, with his newborn daughter. And now you've got further drama, which might be pushing him out. So you guys might remember that back in Japan, Max had a press conference where he kicked out a journalist. So Max refused to even start the press conference before Giles Richards was kicked out of the room, and Giles was like, are you serious? And Max was like, yes, for that question in Abu Dhabi and whatever in it, and he kicked him out. And there was a lot of talk about it at the time because people felt like, well, maybe the guy deserved it, right? Or maybe the other journalist should have stood up and took a stand or something, right? Some sort of journalistic integrity. I think the kind of caveat here was that this was in Red Bull's hospitality. This wasn't like a public press conference in quite the same way. So the journalists aren't, if Max wants to kick them out of Red Bull's own hospitality, that's kind of his right to do so. But it didn't really feel great from a few angles. And, well, it was discussed at length at the time. Max had a few things to say, and, well, actually, he did put an article together on it, and here is Giles Richards in question. He put this article together because he got a load of publicity out of this. I'm sure it was actually great that he got kicked out of the press conference. Basically, he asked Max back in Abu Dhabi about this incident, and Max felt that he gave him a stupid grin. I knew that question would come. You're giving me a stupid grin now. Giles says, I don't think I did have a stupid grin. I was taken aback by the vehemence of his reply. say, and it might have prompted a nervous smile. I wasn't enjoying myself at his expense. And then I turned up to Japan, and he just said, get out of the room, I'm not talking to anyone before you leave, right? So he got his marching orders and all of that, and he goes on to say that, well, he respects Verstappen and hopes they can enjoy a better relationship in the future or whatever. Now, there was some follow-on to this that said that Red Bull weren't very happy about this. Red Bull, in fact, wanted to talk to Max. There was a report that suggested that Verstappen had even been summoned and were like, yeah, Max, not really a good look, this one. Especially because it was a reasonable question in the circumstances. Max just wasn't happy at his attitude, which is fair, but also it's a very subjective thing. We don't know whether Giles did give him a stupid, mischievous grin or something. You know, that's how Max perceived it, of course, and that's Max's right to feel how he likes, but also I can understand the general feeling, certainly from the team and maybe the general public more widely, to say it's part of the game. In my opinion, if you don't want to answer any questions from him in the press conference, like, just refuse to answer his questions. As far as I'm concerned, it's kind of his right, but to kick him out before anyone else even got to ask anything, I thought was probably a bit outrageous. Now, anyway, there was rumours that Max had been summoned by Red Bull, but then there were other discussions that said, no, that's not true. And apparently Red Bull wanted to make clear to Max that we are not a team that throws journalists out of hospitality, which is understandable, but equally it happened and it was in the past. But now there's another update, because according to rumours, the FIA has actually come to Red Bull now and said, yeah, this wasn't great, we want some sort of action as a result, because Verstappen kicks out the journalist after all the drama that we just discussed. Max has no intention of course, meeting Giles and coming to any sort of agreement, and nor would you expect that to be the case. But apparently, the F1 Media Advisory Council has debated this, and presumably some of the other journalists, although at the time they didn't take any sort of stand, which is, I'm not expecting them to necessarily, but maybe the journalists came together afterwards and thought, it's kind of outrageous, right? If he's doing it to Giles, then he could do it to any one of us at any point, and things could get a little bit nasty. So maybe they came together and said, look, this happened in the Red Bull hospitality. F1 Media Advisory Council have a discussion about it. Apparently they've now had conversations with Red Bull's head of communications and are basically saying, yeah, this wasn't a good look for Formula One, it wasn't a good look for you. We want to make sure that you make it clear to Max that is not going to happen again. Now, first of all, good luck getting Max to comply with such a request, especially with all the circumstances right now around his future being discussed at length. So just another thing to add to the list of push factors to Max, right? Because if Lauren McKees is in Max's ear and saying, oh yeah, please Max, you need to do a much better job with the journalists, we can't be having that. Look, if Max is winning the title, he'll be like, okay, whatever, fine, you guys built me a great car, I see how it is, I don't want to get kicked out or leave the sport because then, I'm not going to win the championship, but he ain't winning the championship anyway. So what is there to lose this season from that perspective? And if it's just something else for Max to say, well, the FIA are trying to cook me, my own team's not very happy about my conduct when they're meant to have my best interests at heart or whatever, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in the Christian Horner era, Horner would defend Max to the hilt whatever happened, right? If the FIA come knocking at Horner's door, Horner will either tell him to get lost or tell, oh yeah, don't worry, I'll let Max know, don't worry about it, and then wouldn't, or would do whatever it takes to keep Max happy, right? That's kind of how it felt like when Horner was at the team. Whatever you think about Horner, like, he did protect his drivers. I think that was fair to say. Whereas now, Red Bull just feels it's a bit more corporate, it's a bit different, and I don't know, it's not quite the same as it was under the Horner era, that's for sure. And if Max is feeling that to an extent, it's not a huge deal. The regulations and the car are more important factors in Max's future, but it's just one additional push that might make him decide, you know what, I've had enough of this for at least the time being. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. These are the current team standings after the first 3 rounds of the season. Last year, Mercedes were second. This year, they're first. McLaren were first last year, now they are third. Red Bull were third at the start of last season. They are now way down in 6th. Ferrari have made some progress. Even a Haas are better this season. They've only scored 3 more points, Haas, but that's good enough for 4th because, well, Mercedes have scored basically all the points up for grabs so far this season. The big improvers in many ways have been Alpine, which shouldn't come as a huge shock, but they've gone from 0 points this time last year up to 16. Williams have gone the other way. Aston Martin also very much losers of the season so far. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. and I'll see you next time.